You just come out of combat where the only color that mattered was green. And then you got to come home to all of this. When I was in Vietnam, I've seen black guys risk their lives for Hispanic guys. I've seen Hispanic guys risk their lives for white guys. It didn't matter, as long as you was an American, especially in the Marines. As long as you're a Marine, it don't matter what color you are.
Welcome to Lost Soldiers, a production of Wreaths Across America Radio, brought to you by SaveCedarGrove.org and HistorySouth.org. Here are your hosts, Shay Malik Abdullah and Dr. Tom Hanchett.
Hello and welcome. We'd like to thank SaveCedarGrove.org with Veterans Bridge Home for their participation in the cleanup and sharing of this material that we are uncovering. The Carolina Spangler Room of the Mecklenburg Library System and John O'Connor has been a wonderful help to us, so we're really happy to be here. I'm Shay Abdullah, here with Tom Hanchett, author of Sorting Out the New South, community historian, one of my favorite people.
Hello, Jay. It's great to be here. We're looking into stories that are related to Cedar Grove Cemetery in Charlotte, North Carolina. Why should you be interested in that? Well, it's kind of a window on African-American life in the 20th century. People who were kind of ordinary heroes, everyday heroes, served our country. We know something of the history of about 20 people who are buried there, many of them the veterans of World War I, some of them veterans of World War II. And we're, even as we record these podcasts, learning more. And today we're going to be hanging out with someone who knows the context of the neighborhood, Mr. Reuben Flax.
Reuben, welcome. Let's find out about Lost Soldiers.
Yeah, this cemetery was opened in the late 19th century, and it functioned for, into the 1960s, 70s, 80s, something like that. By the time Che Abdullah stumbled across it, it was overgrown, hard to imagine that it was a cemetery. And you put together help from students, from community volunteers. Talk just a little bit about that, about this mysterious place that you're learning about.
Cedar Grove has really been a place that has been wildly fascinating to me. And it's mostly because, and Reuben will appreciate this, and that's why I'm glad you're here, is the exposure I've gotten to the people in the community from that project has just been so overwhelmingly impressed with what's happened on Beatties Ford over the years and the strides the Black Charlotte community has made with a lot of the challenges that they faced. Cedar Grove, I think, illustrates so much of that. And we're really honored to, with Veterans Bridge Home and Wreaths Across America, to be able to start to really look at these soldiers and honor them in the appropriate ways. One of the ways that that's happened, and one of the reasons I'm really excited that Reuben's here, is that Reuben has been one of our staunchest supporters with the program. He was a presenter at our second annual Memorial Day event and a big supporter of the first. And I know Reuben's roots in the community really can help us illustrate what life was like for folks during wartime, away from the community, and coming back to the community, and also just giving us a real solid historical snapshot of Beatties Ford and what it's meant to the city, to the country, to the world, quite frankly, now that we're talking about military service. So, Reuben, if you don't mind, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Shay. I think this is a very, very worthwhile project. These men and women who are military veterans deserve our honor. They deserve our respect. And we need to do everything we can to identify these veterans and clean up this park and clean up this cemetery and make it something worthwhile, something that will be the neighborhood itself would be proud of, something that people would come from other areas just to look at because they've heard about it and they've heard about all the good things that have been done there and all the cleanup efforts and everything else. And other people would come from other places just to see this. And that in turn would make our community on the west side of Charlotte look even better than what it is now, than what we're trying to do with it now. And we need to get the city involved, get some elected officials involved, and make them do what they said they was going to do, which is help the people. So let's hold them accountable. And this, like I say, this is a very, very worthwhile project. I am a staunch supporter of veterans in any kind of shape, fashion, or form, regardless of race, regardless of what branch you were in, regardless of whether you're male or female. We are all veterans. We all serve the same purpose. And that's what strengthens that bond between veterans. And veterans groups that are out here that I'm sure would be more than happy to help, in these projects. And we'll get the Boy Scouts involved. Maybe some scout needs a project to become an Eagle Scout. So boom, there we go. We got you. You need us, we need you. So let's get together.
Yeah. You nailed it, Reuben. You really did. I think the community aspect of this project and bringing other people in is really a big key to it. What I would love to do, though, is to learn more about you and your attachment to not only the community, but to service.
Yeah, I really want to picture, as we move along here, of what the Beatties Ford Road corridor was like back in the 1960s and 70s. But to kind of get us there, talk about your service in the Marines. This man has the sharpest looking USMC sweatshirt on and a Purple Heart cap. Talk about your military service, going in, coming out, what you did in between.
I went into the Marines in October 1966. I joined at 17. I was sent to Vietnam 3 months after I turned 18. I was shot twice before I was 19 and was shot once more after I was 19. I'm a 3-time Purple Heart recipient and a member of the North Carolina Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I was a machine gunner in Vietnam. That was my MOS, which is Military Occupational Specialty. And I had dropped out of school, and that was a way out for me to make a better life and get on a better path. And I got my GED while I was in the Marine Corps. And my diploma proudly says West Charlotte Senior High School, go Lions. But anyway, Beatties Ford Road was and still is such a vibrant area. Like I was telling Tom a little while ago, we had 2 movie theaters on Beatties Ford Road, one at the corner of Dundee and Beatties Ford, and the other at the corner of Mill Road and Beatties Ford, which was the Grand Theater, where I got my very first job I ever had at the Grand Theater. I was taught to run the projectors. I guess things are a whole lot different with movies now. Everything's computerized, but they had 2 big projectors, and I was taught how to run those. And that's what I did, made $20 a week. But with that $20 a week, I can go downtown and buy me a shirt and a pair of pants and maybe a pair of shoes and still had bus fare to get back home.
Wow.
What store did you go to when you went downtown?
Newburgh's. It was called Newburgh's. That's where everybody went, or either the National Hat Shop or the National Shirt Shop, which was on opposite corners at the square. But Beatties Ford Road itself, there was a time when you didn't really have to leave Beatties Ford Road to get anything. You had grocery stores, like I say, we had movie theaters, had churches there on Beatties Ford Road, which some are still there. And Beatties Ford Road, a lot of people don't know, Northwest School of the Arts is the original West Charlotte High School. And the building, or the location, not the building they're in now, because it's a new building up there, the location they're in now, they moved to in 1953. And West Charlotte has and always will be a major part of that community when the big event of the year was the Queen City Classic football game, which was between the 2 largest black high schools in the county, which was West Charlotte and Second Ward. And this was the big event of the year, and it was the thing. I mean, everybody went to the Queen City Classic. I mean, everybody went. And West Charlotte would always stomp on Second Ward just about every year. But being me and being the luck I have, when we moved to the west side of town and I got transferred to West Charlotte, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to be on the winning side now. Then West Charlotte started losing. So I said, oh, well. But anyway, like I said, West Charlotte always was and always will be a major, major part of that side of town because there's so much love and school pride in the West Charlotte. I mean, you could go to a West Charlotte football game tonight, and you see people from all graduating class from back in the 50s.
Wow.
They graduated West Charlotte. and they still love the school, and they still support the school, and they still go to the football games. Plus, if you're over 60, you get in free. So
the corridor, the Beatties Ford Road corridor, folks who don't know Charlotte real well, the anchor there is Johnson C. Smith University. And that was itself a football powerhouse. The first ever intercollegiate football game was Livingstone College and Johnson C. Smith way back in the day. This is before any of us were alive. But talk about JCSU and what kind of folk it attracted as neighbors along Beatties Ford Road.
JCSU has always been loved by that community. I mentioned the Queen City Classic football game between the high schools. The other big event of the year in the black community was Johnson C. Smith's homecoming game. I mean, everybody went with new outfits on. You had to go buy a new outfit, and you had to go to the game. Not necessarily to watch the game, but to see and be seen. It was a fashion show. It was a football game.
Fashion show when the football game
right. It was a fashion show when the football game broke out. And they would have the parade, and it was just such a big event, But now I guess, times change, attitudes change or whatever. There doesn't seem to be as much support for John C. Smith as it used to be, which I think should change because, they're very much involved in the community. They're involved with us, so we in turn should be involved with them, because they can do things for us and open up a lot of doors that even the neighborhood presidents don't have access to. So if you got John C. Smith, okay, boom, and all your historical archives of Black Charlotte, from back in when the House of Prayer, the mother house was on McDowell Street, all kinds of photos from back then. The old Lincoln Theater that was on 2nd Street, Miles Street Elementary School, which I went to 1st through 6th grade, that's not even there anymore, which was right across the street from 2nd Ward, which was 7th through 12th grade. And the only thing left of that is the gymnasium. And along that point, out of all the formerly all-black high schools in Charlotte or in Mecklenburg County, West Charlotte is the only one still left. All the rest are gone. 2nd Ward, York Road, Torrance Light out of Huntersville, Sterling out of Pineville, J.H. Gunn, they're all gone now.
And that is a really good transition point to talk about your getting into the Marines. You started at 2nd Ward High School, which is the older black high school in the center city. You moved out with your family out to the west side, out the Beatties Ford area, went to West Charlotte High School. And then what happened?
After West Charlotte High School, my sophomore year, everyone that lived north of I-85 got transferred to North Mecklenburg. And that was the beginning of the end of my high school days because, as I was telling Tom earlier, at that time, North Mecklenburg was known as the Rebels, as in Confederate rebels. And at all the football games, there was a guy dressed in a Confederate uniform waving a big giant Confederate flag. At all the pep rallies, the same thing. You go into the cafeteria, there were little flag stands on the cafeteria tables with rebel flags on them. So I never could wrap my mind around that as far as being making myself a part of that. And like I say, that's the thing that the catalyst that started my downfall with high school. And I dropped out after the 11th grade. I never went back. That was in that June, and that October I was in boot camp in the Marines. And I got my GED while I was in the Marines. And at that time, the federal government had a program where any military member who achieved their GED on active duty could get a diploma from any high school in the United States, whether you went to that high school or not. And I'm proud to say my diploma says West Charlotte Senior High School. I have nothing. I hold no ties to North Mecklenburg. Maybe I would feel a little different if I had graduated there, but I didn't graduate there because of all of this. It caused me to drop out. And so when they asked me what high school name that I want on my diploma, it was no question. West Charlotte Senior High School.
Dub C.
Dub C, you know it.
Reuben, I love the transition that you made there. And one of the things, just for the audience's sake, Reuben and I kind of go way back at this point. We've been working together with a community organization called the Historic Weston Neighborhood Association for many years now. Reuben's been a part of that organization, I want to say, from the start. What you touched on is really interesting to me, Reuben, because the time that you were making this transition was right around the end of segregation. Am I correct? So you had not really actually gone to school in any kind of integrated environment. What did integration look like, or what did the community look like in Beatties Ford as you were coming up, as you transitioned there? And just set the stage for us a little bit. And just to add to that, I'm also curious about your experience with military folks prior to becoming a military man yourself. Do you remember that in the community and what that was like? What kind of pride or status the soldiers that had gone before you held in the community?
Yes, every once in a while, like, you see a church member or somebody from the community that was active military, and they would be in their uniform, and we'd always sit around and say who had the best looking uniform. The Navy had the bell bottoms, and the Army this, and the Marines that, and the Air Force in their blue, looking like Trailways bus drivers. But anyway, it was always sort of a source of inspiration, because I remember a lot of the guys would say, "That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. When I grow up, when I get out of school, that's what I want to do." So a lot of the guys had that seed planted, at a young age. And myself, I come from a military family, so to speak. My daddy was in World War II. My granddaddy was in World War I. And I had an uncle that was in Korea. And I had my older brother went to the Marines 4 months before I did. He was stationed in California for 3 years before he got out. So I have cousins, uncles, everybody. A lot of people in my family are military veterans. So when I see pictures of them, and sometimes you would ask them, what was it like to do this, or what was it like to do that, blah, 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 blah. But during my time, it was sort of a double-edged sword, because this was mid to late 60s, and you had a lot of racial unrest going on. You had a lot of civil unrest going on with college campus, demonstrations, anti-war demonstrations, and all like that. So I kind of caught a lot of flack from both sides, when I came back, because I came back from Vietnam. We landed at the airport in San Francisco. It was myself, one other Marine, and 3 Army guys, and they had military police there to escort us through the airport, because they threw eggs at us, they spit on us. And in my situation, you had black people on one side calling me Uncle Tom for going to fight the white man's war. Then you had white people on the other side calling me a murderer and baby killer and all like that. They spit on us and all kind of stuff. And the military police, they wouldn't let us react. They just kept pushing us through. And they strongly urged us not to even wear our uniforms because of that. But I mean, some guy that's active military, he'll stick out like a sore thumb because you recognize him, because his walk is different, his appearance is different. A military man when you see one.
In or out of uniform.
Right. And so they pushed us through the airport, and they had a car waiting on us, and took us to a secluded area where we could just sit down and unwind, so to speak, without a whole bunch of people, bothering us, And like I say, that was just the way it was. That was just the times back then, But it was sort of a shock to you, because you just come out of the military, you just come out of combat where the only color that mattered was green, And then you got to come home to all of this, Because even when I was in Vietnam, I've seen black guys risk their lives for Hispanic guys. I've seen Hispanic guys risk their lives for white guys. It didn't matter, as long as you was an American, especially in the Marines. As long as you're a Marine, it don't matter what color you are. You going back, and everybody else got your back just like they got everybody else's back. And that's the way it had to be in order for you to make it out of that, because you couldn't. There was no place for any type of racial division or social division or anything else when the bullets are flying, you know, because the North Vietnamese, they didn't care what race you were. Only thing that mattered to them was that you were an American, you know. So that's kind of the way it was for me. And after that, when I got out in 1970, came home and entered the workforce, and you know, just tried to live my life, and you know, start a family, and you know, and just take it from there, and you know, roll with the punches and adapt, improvise, and overcome. You know, that's what I've been taught, and that's been my philosophy, and that's been my survival. That's what I do.
This is incredible. I'm really, really happy to get to talk to you in this type of detail about really what that experience was like for you. How old were you when you set foot in Vietnam, and what was your first memory of that? And I also want to know if you were involved in any other conflicts as a part of the Marine Corps during your time.
We left the United States on September 20th, 1967, and I think it was like 2 days later, I was in Vietnam at 18 years old. I turned 18 that June, and that September I was in Vietnam. My first impression, or my first thought of Vietnam, was how hot and humid it was, you know. But you learn to get adjusted to that, because your first few days, you know, you're not acclimated to that climate. You know, it's burning up hot, it's steamy hot, and a lot of guys were falling out, passing out from the heat and everything. So they kind of go easy on you the first couple of days, you know, let you get acclimated to that heat. But after that, you know, boom, you out there right along with everybody else. It was kind of thing that, and you lose track of a lot of things. The only day we knew what day of the week it was Sunday. And that's because they passed out malaria tablets on Sunday. So if you see them coming around handing out malaria tablets, you know it was Sunday.
Wow.
And the next day, you still got track, okay, today is Monday, because yesterday was malaria, but 2 or 3 days go by, you lost track of what day it was. You know?
Wow.
So that's just the way it was. I mean, you learn to do things. I could do things back then that I can't do now because I haven't done them in a while. The survival tips, like I had a guy taught me, I'm right-handed. I had a guy taught me how to tie my shoes with my left hand, just in case I lost my right hand.
Wow.
I'm already adept with this left hand. I can do things with the left hand, so I'm not totally at a loss. You know, there's little things like that you pick up on, but like I said, I haven't done that in years and years and years, so I probably couldn't tie my shoe with my left hand now if I wanted to. You know, you learn to do things with one hand.
Yeah.
You learn to do things with your opposite hand, which in my case would be my left hand. You know, just things like that. But, you know, like I say, just in case, because you never know what's going to happen, and you always look out for your fellow Marine, just like he's looking out for you.
This question's for Tom. I think this is a great transition to sort of, set up some of the conversations from sorting out the New South, and really like a sort of a different idea or a picture of the landscape that Reuben's described to us. What was happening in the rest of Charlotte as Reuben was understanding these things and growing up on the west side?
Well, Charlotte is a southern city. By the time you got to the middle of the 20th century, it was pretty seriously segregated. There were also some powerful civil rights activities going on here in the early 60s. One of the largest ever sit-ins to desegregate eating places. Charles Jones, later attorney Charles Jones, a figure in the community, helped lead those out of Johnson C. Smith University in 1960. Reginald Hawkins, who was himself a military veteran, a dentist, minister, led multiple marches that desegregated things like the public hospital, the YMCA. Eventually, he and others came together in a lawsuit in 1966, got decided a few years after that, called Swan versus Mecklenburg. That is the beginning of court-ordered busing for racial balance here in the United States. And so you were at a time that was just a lot of stuff going on. Had you been aware of civil rights activism before you went away, or even when you came back? Was that part of something that you knew about, or was it just a kind of a distant thing that eventually would involve you, but not in the short term?
I was aware of it because it was people's houses. Fred Alexander and Kelly Alexander's houses were bombed, which was right across the street from the high school, West Charlotte High School, where I was going. And I remember my dad had taken us to school that morning, whereas normally we walked to school. But considering the situation, he drove us to school that morning. And we remember seeing the houses, the damage that was done to the houses. And I remember I was old enough to know and understand about the 4 little girls that were killed in church in Birmingham, bombed in Birmingham in 1963, if I remember right. I was old enough to remember that, and I had faced it and seen it enough to know that it was there, because I remember I must have been 8, 9 years old. Charlotte had started an effort to recruit more black police officers, and they would be police officers in name only. You'd have no arrest powers over white people. You could only detain a white person until a white officer got there to make the actual arrest. But anyway, I remember they came to our house one night. We lived on South Mile Street between 3rd and 4th. And they came to our house one night to talk to my daddy about this. And me being a nosy kid, I'm standing outside the door listening. And I remember they asked my daddy, what would you do if you became an officer? What would you do if a white man called you the N-word? And my daddy looked at him and said, I'd blow his GD brains out. And the officer looked back at my dad and said, thank you, Mr. Flax, we appreciate your time. And they got up and left. So I was fully aware of it, And there was, I think, one white family. It was a lawyer, an attorney that lived at the corner of 4th and Myers. Of course, we never had any interactions with them or anything. And like I said, I think I was 14 when we left from over there. So I was old enough to be aware of it and old enough to understand, what was going on. Plus, a lot of times you hear adults talking about different things, so you pick up on a lot of things like that, So, I mean, if I had been 5, 6 years old, maybe I wouldn't have, been aware of it like I was, but I was older, so I had an understanding of it. I had seen it. I had witnessed it, because, but you never really question it because that's just the way it was. That's the way things were. You didn't, nobody wondered, well, why I can't do this, or why is there only one bathroom in the whole downtown Charlotte that black people could use? Wow. It was a department store called S.H. Crest, set right there on the square, and they had a bathroom in the basement that blacks could use. Nobody ever questioned. I mean, as far as children, nobody ever questioned, why does that water fountain say colored? Why does that water fountain say white on it? But you didn't question because that's the way, that's all you knew, right? Because that's the way it was.
You grew up with that and then went off to fight for your country. I think that's pretty astounding. And a credit to you and all that served in a situation like that you still believed enough in this country to put your own lives on the line to see what kind of changes you can make for folks, black and white.
We have to live here too. So whatever affects one group of people affects everybody else because we're all here. And the people that were against the war, as far as black people that were against the war for their reasons behind racism and all like that, okay, I understand that. But my reasoning was all the things that others have done, all the ways that others have paved, all the roads that others have paved, Fannie Lou Hamer, some unknown names, lesser known names, Fannie Lou Hamer, Viola Luisi, people like that, Dr. King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X. What about all the work they did? You know, do we just bury all of that and let all of that go in vain? Or do we stand up and take our rightful place as American citizens? And in order to take that rightful place as an American citizen, you got to put in the work. You got to put in the effort. Instead of sitting back and waiting on somebody to hand you something, get up off your butt and get it yourself and earn it. That's the way we're going to climb out of a lot of situations that we're in now, is taking accountability.
This would be a good point to give folks a shout out for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial here in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's one of the most impressive that I've seen outside of Washington, D.C. And if you haven't found it, if you're in the Charlotte area, it's on 3rd Street opposite the main campus of Central Piedmont Community College. And it's a vast arc of stone panels that on one part of each panel, it tells what was happening in a particular year in the conflict in Vietnam. And on the other panel, it gives names of veterans who gave their lives. And there are over 100 names on that panel, black, white, and everything else. So the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, definitely worth checking out.
Tom, this is a great transition because we're talking a little bit about your book, Sorting Out the New South. And I remember specifically one of the things that you pointed out so well there is something Reuben just discussed, and that was how neighborhoods were integrated at one point in Charlotte. I mean, Reuben just said he lived a couple blocks away from a white lawyer. The interaction may not have been heavy, but it still existed, that the neighborhoods were shared. And I know that's something you really pointed out in your book. I just wanted to make that point real quick and then let you share a little bit about that, Tom, before I ask the next question.
Yeah, the history of race is a history of people like Reuben Flax persisting until things move in the right direction. And they haven't always moved in any one particular direction. And I was amazed when I was doing the research on how Charlotte grew and changed over the last 150 years to find out that there was much more racial closeness in terms of, physical neighborhoods. I'm not saying everybody sat around the campfire singing Kumbaya, holding hands. But for instance, near Johnson C. Smith University, just off of Beatties Ford Road, is Seversville. And Seversville had been a white neighborhood from the founding back in the 19th century all the way up into the 1960s. White folks living really close to this historically black college. And so this vision that we can live much more closely than we do now is part of my conviction out of that. But also that things were really changing because Mr. Flax is talking about having to leave the Brooklyn neighborhood, the Second Ward neighborhood where he had first gone to school, and move out to the west side, out to Beatties Ford Road, which was a step up, but it was also because the federal government in this era was undertaking something that was misnamed as urban renewal, which meant tearing down a lot of neighborhoods, especially black neighborhoods. And so this time of civil rights advance is also a time when people are really getting hurt by the urban renewal thing. And so the tensions that came about over the war were wrapped up in these wider tensions of a society that was on one hand talking about desegregating, moving towards desegregation, but on the other hand, places like Seversville were becoming places of refuge for black folks who were getting kicked out of other places. And that kind of upheaval, that was a heck of a decade.
Like I said, there was a lot of things that went on because that's just the way things were, and we've come a long way and we still got a long way to go. And like I said, that's just the way things were back then. And a lot of things you didn't question because, and a lot of it was law. A lot of it wasn't just policy. A lot of it was law. I mean, you have to suffer the indignity of using public transportation. You get on the front door of the bus, put your money in the slot, get off the front door of the bus, walk to the back door, and get back on the bus and sit down in a designated area. So what reason can anybody tell me that was for? Other than just straight up racism, because that's the way things were back then. You wanted certain people weren't allowed to vote. Women weren't allowed to vote. That's just the way things were. And one good thing about when the '60s rolled around, it started the ball rolling in a lot of ways to get a lot of things changed. Blacks started getting a lot of rights that they were long neglected. Women started getting a lot of rights that they were long neglected. So that's why I say everyone as an individual, you have to be an upstanding citizen in so many ways. You have to earn your spot in this life. America, has a lot of faults, but by far it's the greatest nation in the world. America got a lot of faults. I'll be the first to admit that. But there's no place else I'd rather live. And anybody that doesn't want to stay here, you talking about back to Africa. I've never been to Africa. I can't go back someplace I've never been. I'm an American. I fought for this country. I bled for this country. And this is where I'm going to be, and this is where my family's going to be. And that all comes back to accountability. When you hear people saying, go back to this place or go back to that place, I'm in a position I can say, well, what have you done for this country that puts you in a position to say who should be here and who shouldn't? Then you hear the old familiar, I pay taxes. Everybody pays taxes, So you can't tell me I don't belong here, I fought for this country. I bled for this country. And I challenge anybody out there that thinks they're in a position to tell me that I don't belong here. You tell me what you have done. And if yours out trumps mine, then and you don't want me here, then we can sit down and talk about it. But like I say, it's all about accountability. You can't sit back and wait on somebody to hand you something. Nobody has a job where you stay at home every day and they mail you a check every week for doing nothing.
Man, I love this conversation so much, Reuben. I want to take us back to where we started in this conversation, and that's Cedar Grove. And the concept that Tom and I are doing here, Lost Soldiers, and yourself, because this is a really big opportunity to really recognize those people. I'm curious what Cedar Grove was like back when it was operating and functional and you could actually see it and locate it. Do you recall any of those times and those stories? And then I also want to talk about the service of the men that are there. We call this show Lost Soldiers because that was an abandoned place with a bunch of people that have done some really remarkable things. And as you just so eloquently stated, fought for this country and everything that everyone here has was a part of their existence. And it's so important to me that we talk about that. But I want to learn more about what Cedar Grove was like, what it might have meant to some folks, if you have any recollection, any of that.
Well, Shay, I have no recollection of Cedar Grove at all. Matter of fact, I wasn't even aware of Cedar Grove until you started this project. Wow. And that's when I became aware of it and got involved with it. And I spoke to my younger brothers who went to school there at University Park, and they knew about it because they would pass by it, every day. But they never, being an elementary school kid, you don't connect the dots together, like an older person would, So like I say, I wasn't even aware of Cedar Grove. And just in case anybody else out there is not aware of it, it's right next to the old University Park Elementary School, Creative Arts School, University Park. It's right there next to it. So if you know where the school is, you know where the cemetery is.
We're getting close to wrapping up here. This has been great conversation that we've been able to have, Reuben. I wanted to, you mentioned University Park Creative Arts School, and it always makes me smile. That's where I got my start in Charlotte. I had no idea that Cedar Grove was there either. But through some of that history and research, we've learned so much more about the area. When I say we, I'm talking about me. And even yourself, like you said, you didn't know Cedar Grove was there. I didn't either until we really started to peel back and look at that. You mentioned University Park Creative Arts School, and what that school meant to the community is something I've been learning more and more about. Libby Randolph started that school in 1958, I believe. She was the first principal there. And Libby Randolph's claim to fame is that she was a really dynamic educator that ran West Charlotte High. And when they decided to open University Park, they selected her. And she went on to be one of the first black women to hold major offices and influence in the CMS education system. I mention that all and give this long soliloquy because University Park Creative Arts School is about to be demolished because they're building a whole big new campus there. That school will be 66 years old, and it sits, again, just adjacent from the Cedar Grove Cemetery. So the history there and the ties to the history are so rich that I can't wait to have you back on the show to find other people with great history and great contributions to Charlotte and America that we can celebrate and use to really highlight the lost soldiers of Cedar Grove and really what that means symbolically. So, Tom, why don't you give us some great closing thoughts here? We'll say goodbye to Reuben and get prepared for our next adventure.
I'm having a great time. This is absolutely wonderful. And thank you, Che Abdullah, for making this happen. Mr. Flax, why should kids at that school be interested in all this?
History. Your parents probably went there. Your grandparents may have gone there. It's part of the community. It's something that needs to be recognized. And just like Cedar Grove Cemetery itself, the school needs to be recognized and the cemetery needs to be recognized. So if it's okay with you, Shay, I'm just going to make an appeal to anybody that has or thinks they have relatives buried there, particularly the veterans. You know, we can identify veterans, and that we could get with some VA departments and maybe get some headstones for those graves that are unmarked that would be furnished by the VA itself and won't cost nobody nothing. But we need to identify these people. So if you got family members or you know somebody's got a family member that's ever talked about Uncle so-and-so being buried over there, please let us know.
Again, I'm having such a great time, too. It's hard to close the show out, but I think we got to get there. But I did want to share something with you, Reuben, that I think is kind of neat. When I reached out to Tom about what was happening over at Cedar Grove, he was head over heels to get involved and throw in his expertise on history and research. And we know we've said several times that Tom's the most handsome historian in all of Charlotte, and besides that, very talented as well with what he does. But the first thing that Tom was able to pick up is a soldier named Wendell French. He's one of our favorites because he's opened the door to so much information. But you may not know this yet, but Wendell French, I found out through Tom, served in World War II with my grandfather. And you know that I had no association to that place until I worked at that school. Till I saw what was going on there. I didn't get involved in the research because of that, but I found that out because of that research. And what was so important about that to me, Reuben, is that, like you talked about it as well, my grandpa never talked about his military experience. He had 5 kids, and I've asked them all multiple times if he served, and they didn't know until Tom was able to find that information related to Wendell French. I just saw a couple more pictures of Mr. French I found in the JCSU archive. He went off to war, came back, apparently lived a very fruitful life. We've got his address right up on Beatties Ford. It's now the mosque. That's where he lived. And he served with my grandpa in World War II. As our research continues, we're finding out more and more things like this. So, Reuben, this is a great place to close. I want to thank you for your time, for sharing this incredible information about Cedar Grove and your life and experiences here in Charlotte. And what we hope is that that'll, continue to grow and we can discuss these stories, celebrate these contributions that Charlotteans of all colors have made, but particularly our Black citizens and our soldiers and veterans, and build that opportunity for the future, bridge that gap that we've sort of fallen into, where these kids now in these environments are able to use these stories and use these opportunities and this experience with our seasoned community members to be better prepared for what's ahead. So really, really thank you for your time. Tom, I'd love to hear a few words from you before we close out, and then we can thank Mr. Reuben for his time and hope to see him again soon.
There are other Lost Soldiers podcasts, and listen to all the ones in this series. We're having fun getting to know all of this history, and we hope you're having fun coming along and feeling inspired. Oh, man. that's me today.
Oh yeah, inspiration is great. And then again, a huge shout out and big thank you to Mr. Reuben Rock Flax for your service, for your presence in the community, and for your continued effort to make this place shine. So thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Lost Soldiers, a production of Wreaths Across America Radio, brought to you by SaveCedarGrove.org and HistorySouth.org.